Today we will talk about the events that took place in 2020 in the state of Ohio. Morgan Fox, a 29-year-old woman, was found unconscious in her car. It was her boyfriend who called 911 to resolve the case, and investigators had to search for evidence at the crime scene and analyze the digital traces left by the perpetrator. In 2020, Morgan Fox was living with her 9-year-old daughter and her boyfriend in Plain Township, Stark County, Ohio. Her daughter was the most important person in her life, and Morgan worked hard to ensure that her daughter received everything she needed. At that time, Morgan held the position of operations manager at FedEx. Unfortunately, Morgan tragically passed away in the early morning of October 28, 2020. Her boyfriend found her in the driveway of their home, where Morgan was sitting in the driver's seat of her SUV. The car door was slightly open, and she had a head wound. Her boyfriend told the 911 operator that Morgan had no pulse and also assumed that someone had hit her on the head. It was raining when the police officers arrived at the crime scene, and in such cases, rain can destroy important evidence. Morgan was half inside the car and half outside, and her bag was with her, but it didn't seem like anyone had stolen it. There was also some cash in the car, but the perpetrator did not take it. Investigators noticed a bullet hole in the passenger door and realized that someone had shot Morgan next to the neighboring house. There were fresh tire tracks on the grass and mud splatter on the fence, but at that time it was not clear if this was related to the case. When the experts removed Morgan's body from the car, they saw 2 bullet holes in her head, one behind her left ear and the other at the top of her head. Everything indicated that someone approached her car while she was getting in and shot her. Investigators had to find out who committed this cold-blooded brutal crime. There were various items scattered near her car, and Morgan's cell phone was also on the ground. The phone is always a crucial piece of evidence, as it may contain vital information for the investigation. The police took Morgan's phone as evidence, hoping it was not damaged by the rain. Morgan's mother said she spoke to her daughter on the phone the night before. Investigators asked her if Morgan had any enemies or if her relationship with her boyfriend was good, and if there was anyone who wanted to harm her. Morgan's mother stated that Morgan and her boyfriend had some problems in their relationship from time to time, but they had been living peacefully recently. The mother also informed investigators that Morgan had issues with some male coworkers. When investigating such cases, police first check if the people closest to the victim are involved. This is why investigators interrogated Morgan's boyfriend, as he was the one who discovered her cold body and who called the police. He stated that he and Morgan had been living together for about a year, and although he was not the father of her daughter, they understood each other well. Morgan was supposed to go to work that day to be there by 2:30 a.m. She usually wakes up around 1 a.m. and leaves the house at 2 a.m. or just before that. This timing was usually enough for her not to be late for her shift. Her boyfriend said he woke up around 6 a.m. and looked out the window to see that her car was still parked at the house, which he found strange. So he immediately went out to check what happened. He left the house and saw that Morgan was still in the car and was unresponsive, and after that he called 911. He was disturbed and emotional when investigators asked him questions, and he appeared shocked by Morgan's death and wanted to help with the investigation. During their conversation, he did not seem to try to hide anything. He said that the previous day, Morgan had dropped her daughter off at her grandmother's house as she always did when she worked nights, then returned home, had dinner, and went to bed. Morgan's boyfriend also informed investigators about one incident that piqued their interest. According to him, Morgan had a conflict with some male coworkers because they took her phone, which she had left on her desk. She entered the office and saw them browsing through the pictures and personal information stored on her phone. She became angry and fought with those colleagues. There was almost no evidence at the crime scene, so investigators hoped they could find surveillance cameras in the area. The officer went door to door and discovered several cameras at doorknobs. At that time, this was their only hope, as there were no other investigations up to that point. But even these hopes were not fulfilled. The video they obtained showed nothing suspicious. Fortunately for the police, Morgan's phone was not damaged by the rain, and they were able to turn it on. They analyzed her text messages and discovered that her boyfriend was the last person she had communicated with. Studying the messages made the investigators realize that everything was fine between Morgan and her boyfriend. On October 8, 20 days before her death, Morgan wrote a message to her boyfriend explaining how some colleagues had taken her phone and browsed it. She was certain that they found intimate pictures of her there. After reading these messages, there was no doubt that Morgan's boyfriend had told them the truth, as investigators heard about Morgan's issues with her colleagues from various sources. They went to her workplace, needing to know the details of the incident they had learned about. They confirmed with the manager that the incident involving Morgan's phone indeed happened, and 3 male employees were involved in this incident. FedEx provided the police with files on these 3 individuals, and officers discovered something disturbing after studying them. 2 of the employees were not particularly interesting to the police, but the 3rd colleague was extremely suspicious. At one point, he received a verbal warning at work for harassing another female colleague and continued this behavior even when she asked him to stop. His name was Jason German, and the police knew that Morgan usually left home around 2 a.m. to go to work and was supposed to be at her workplace by 2:30 a.m. Given that there was not enough time for her to drive away from her house, investigators were aware of the time frame for the crime being between 2 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. Thus, they decided to verify when Jason McDermott arrived at work that night. They requested the surveillance video footage, which showed that McDermott arrived at work at 1:58 a.m. that night and entered through the back door, indicating that he was not at his workplace at the time of the crime, which is why he became a suspect in this case. McDermott left work at 1:58 a.m., and according to the manager, he behaved as usual that day. FedEx confirmed that McDermott was an employee as well, with the spokesman stating that they continued to extend their sincerest condolences to Morgan Fox's family and friends in light of this tragic event, and that FedEx was fully cooperating with law enforcement throughout their investigation. According to one account, Morgan had ended her relationship with McDermott, which shocked him. McDermott wrote an apology message to Fox and received a verbal warning at work, understanding that he would be fired if a similar incident occurred again. The family was uncertain about whom to suspect, and through social media, Morgan's sister urged anyone with information to contact the police, as someone may have witnessed something valuable. They had to inform Morgan's 9-year-old daughter that her mother had passed away. Meanwhile, investigators were focusing on Morgan's coworkers and reanalyzing her phone to see if Morgan had sent a text to someone who had taken her phone without permission and looked at her pictures. They found correspondences with Jason McDermott that caught investigators' attention. About a year before Morgan's death, Jason had brought breakfast to work and showed a willingness to help her. Morgan thanked him and considered him a friend, while he seemed to want more. However, after the phone incident, Morgan's messages to Jason became harsh, indicating that she lost trust in him. The last contact between them was on October 2nd, just 4 days before Morgan's death, when Jason asked about her trip to Columbus, which surprised her since she hadn't mentioned it to him. Jason claimed that she had told him about it herself, but she hadn't spoken with him much after the phone incident. Moreover, investigators did not find any messages on Morgan's phone indicating she was heading to Columbus, casting doubt on whether Jason McDermott might have been tracking her. Jason was summoned to the police station for questioning and claimed that he and Morgan did not have a romantic relationship. He admitted that he loved Morgan, but only as a friend, indicating that at one time he thought he had feelings for her. But after reconsideration, he concluded that it was not love. Investigators asked him if he knew anyone who would harm Morgan, and he replied that he did not know anyone who wanted to hurt her. Then one of the officers asked a direct question, "Did you shoot Morgan Fox?" And he answered no, denying any connection to Morgan's death. He agreed to let investigators examine his phone content, hoping they would find something on his phone to confirm or deny his testimony. The first thing investigators wanted to know was the location of his phone on the night of the attack on Morgan Fox. If there was evidence indicating he was near Morgan's house at the time of the crime, he would be the first suspect. However, after checking the location history of his phone, investigators found that Jason's phone had been in his residential area from 4 p.m. on October 7th until 2:48 a.m. on October 8th. When he left for work, his phone appeared to have stayed in the area during that time, which usually indicates that the phone's owner was home at that time. McDermott's phone was sent to the forensic lab so that experts could extract all data, including the deleted information. While investigators awaited the results, they received an anonymous call about a potential suspect. The anonymous caller stated that the police should pay special attention to another man named Mark, who might have had a relationship with Morgan. When the police questioned Mark about Morgan Fox, he said they had a professional relationship. They examined his phone, finding nothing of interest to the investigation. After verifying conclusive evidence, the police excluded Mark from the list of suspects. During the investigation, the police excluded all suspects except Morgan's boyfriend and her colleague Jason McDermott. But it was McDermott who raised the most suspicion, so investigators decided to focus their attention on him. Before questioning McDermott, the police found him at his parents' house, where his car was parked in the driveway. The officers noticed that the car had recently been washed, which seemed odd to them because it had rained the previous day and the roads were still wet. They began to wonder why he needed to wash his car. They learned from Jason that on October 18th, after his shift ended, he stopped at a gas station and a car wash, prompting investigators to look there and review the surveillance footage. The recordings confirmed that he arrived at the car wash straight after work. But there was another strange detail. After carefully cleaning the edges of the rear tires, McDermott bizarrely decided to clean the area again. This seemed peculiar to investigators, considering the roads were still wet from the rain. After washing his car, he drove to the gas station to the store located there, but he did not enter the store when he stopped and exited the car. Instead, he wandered around Ford and examined it carefully. Experts analyzed tire tracks from the crime scene and found them to match those on McDermott's car, explaining why he went to the car wash and cleaned the tires so meticulously. The police checked with his friends and colleagues, all of whom were aware of the incident when Jason took Morgan's phone, and everyone knew that Morgan had decided to stop communicating with him afterward. Each confirmed that Jason was very upset about this and that his behavior changed. It seemed as if he had become obsessed with bringing Morgan back into his life. Investigators began to follow McDermott and discovered that he attended a gathering near Morgan's house, posting pictures from there on social media and writing a lengthy post dedicated to Morgan. He shared photos of Morgan with the hashtag #JusticeForMorgan, and the title of the post read, "Foxy, I wish I had the time to show all the ways you've impacted my life, but the list would be so long that we wouldn't reach the end." McDermott wrote, "I was the friend that if I was having a bad day, I always knew I could talk to you." He continued the post, stating that it was strange not having her around to talk to, and that left a huge void in his heart, but he knew she would continue to watch over her family, friends, and daughter. Experts managed to extract data from his phone, including the data he carefully deleted. His internet browsing history indicated that he was visiting adult video sites daily, showing that he seemed obsessed with this content. In his correspondences with others, he often talked about Morgan and even shared her photos. There were hundreds of pictures of her on his phone. McDermott messaged numerous women on social media, convincing those who responded to meet in person. But at one point, through the data from his phone, McDermott exclusively focused his attention on Morgan Fox and stopped messaging other women. He even documented everything that Morgan did during the summer of 2020. McDermott began secretly filming Morgan on his phone during work hours. He took one video in Morgan's home, where McDermott sat in the kitchen photographing her as she washed dishes. It was clear from the video angles and pictures that Morgan was unaware she was being filmed. It seems that Jason McDermott was obsessed with Morgan Fox, but after seeing him looking at pictures on her phone, Morgan changed her behavior towards him. Perhaps McDermott eventually realized that he had no chance of being with Morgan, and when he understood that, he decided he wouldn't allow her to be in a relationship with anyone else. Jason McDermott was the primary suspect, but the police needed to link him to the crime scene, and the surveillance camera helped them do that. Upon watching the video, they saw Ford McDermott driving toward Morgan's house at 1:38 a.m., and at 2:17 a.m., he drove in the opposite direction. By that time, Morgan had already passed away. A week after Morgan's death, McDermott was arrested. The police searched his car and found no weapon used in the crime. According to investigators, McDermott drove up to Morgan's house and parked in the location where they later spotted the tire tracks. He sat there and waited for Morgan to leave the house and get into her car. And when Morgan exited, McDermott approached her and shot her twice in the head before returning to his car and speeding away from the crime scene, splattering mud on a white fence. He returned home, picked up the phone he had deliberately left there, then drove to work immediately after finishing his shift. Morgan's sister Megan stated that she did not know anything about McDermott until his arrest by the police, but she expressed that she was quite disturbed by the frightening post. "If he truly is the one who took Morgan's life, I think he is a really sick person, a deeply disturbed person who enjoys seeing people in pain," said Megan. The trial began in April 2021, and McDermott, who did not testify during the investigation, maintained his innocence. The defense attorney, Ty Graham, stated that the investigation was flawed from the beginning when McDermott was misidentified. He is a young man with no prior convictions, who works long hours and then goes home to sleep. Graham said, speaking to the press, that on October 8th, McDermott found Morgan's missing phone with 2 colleagues from FedEx and confessed to having seen it with others. McDermott wrote an apology letter to Morgan. Graham also questioned how Morgan's boyfriend, who was inside the house at the time of Morgan's death, did not hear anything from just a few meters away. McDermott quickly presented himself to the police, which granted him access to his car, phone, and his parents' house. According to the defense, McDermott's father owns several firearms, indicating that McDermott did not have access to them. The jury found McDermott guilty of going to the crime scene and killing Morgan Fox. Before announcing the verdict, members of Morgan's family made statements affirming their tremendous suffering due to Morgan's sudden departure. The evidence led to a life sentence for McDermott with the possibility of parole after 23 years. The judge chose not to allow parole, stating, "Despite having no prior convictions, I believe there is a risk of reoffending, and there is a need to protect the public." Morgan's family reached a financial settlement with FedEx, which involved a $4 million settlement, of which $1.3 million would go to the attorneys representing the plaintiffs in the deal. Nearly $2 million was to be placed in a structured fund and account for the future education of Fox's daughter, and approximately $650,000 was divided among 6 members of the Fox family, including her parents, through detailed financial planning. The settlement would allow Fox's daughter to enjoy many things in life that her mother would have wanted for her, such as continuing golf lessons, attending an exceptional college, and celebrating a beautiful wedding.